Hello! Today I will be analyzing and breaking down the Vampire Diaries, which is one of my favorite series from when I was a teenager. What really drew me to the show was the way that it uses the vampires, not just as a monster or villain, but as a reflection of very modern anxieties regarding belonging, addiction, and desire. The Vampire Diaries is a North American produced TV series that is actually based off of L.J. Smith's 1991 novel. It is set in Mystic Falls, Virginia, which is a fictional small town in the American South. That is actually very important. The small town setting is really similar to a lot of Eastern European folk tales that we see, where tight knit communities are often heavily affected by vampire deaths because everyone knows everyone. The show does use the standard English term vampire, but also introduces its own lore and mythology through the originals. The originals are a primordial vampire bloodline created from the McCaelson family, which used magic to protect themselves from werewolves' attack, therefore creating a very powerful and immortal set of vampires. Now there is the standard vampire origin where you die with vampire blood in your system and then you drink human or vampire blood to complete the transformation. Detection in the Vampire Diaries is not so much physical. There is the Founders Council, which is a historic town council and organization dedicated to tracking vampires and defending the town from them. Then there is Vervain, which is exactly like garlic, a plant based repellent to vampires that weakens and limits their abilities. Then there is compulsion failure. That is a detection mechanism in itself. If the mind control doesn't work, then that person will then realize that that person is a vampire. Now, when it comes to attributes physically, the vampires are, undead. So they have no heartbeat, superhuman in strength and speed, immortality, fangs, and regenerative powers and abilities. Now, what is notable is more in the cross contamination section where a werewolf bite actually is lethal to vampires, and witches can control and bind them. And then we have doppelgangers like Elena and Catherine, where a supernatural being can actually be replicated, duplicated, or cloned later down in their bloodline, um, allowing them to sort of have a new source of power. There's a whole thing about doppelgangers. I don't really understand it if I'm being honest. Now we have the activity pattern. Vampires in the Vampire Diaries do sustain themselves solely on blood. Now, that can be either through, human prey or bagged blood that they get from a local hospital, which introduces a fun little moral dilemma and ethical choice for the vampires. Do they want to hunt down their prey and get their blood from human locals, or do they actually want to obtain their blood in a voluntary way? Then there is compulsion. We covered that before, mind control. And the integration and camouflage for these vampires. Daylight rings specifically provide them with safety from the sun, making them easier to blend in. Now, when it comes to precautions, they tend to mirror folk tradition fairly closely. Vervain, once again, works as garlic in this case. The invitation rule, a vampire cannot enter without permission from the homeowner. The Founders Council, once again, the vampires got to watch out. They are being tracked, and they will be killed by the Founders Council if they are found to be hurting humans. Then there's the Gilbert device. That is a special little trinket introduced that can actually incapacitate vampires. Now, for cures, the standard vampire is killed by a wooden stake through the heart. Originals do actually require a white oak stake specifically. And most interestingly, the show actually does introduce a cure in the form of an artifact that can be drank in order to restore mortality, which introduced the nice little fun concept of actually these vampires and monsters choosing to be human and regaining their humanity. Now, when it comes to social and psychological role, yeah, the vampires in the Vampire Diaries do enfranchise the anomalous members of society. They represent vampires who struggle with control, addiction, people who are outsiders, ostracized. Caroline Forbes is an amazing example of this. She starts off the show very anxious and very overbearing, not really fitting in anywhere. But once she turns, she actually becomes her most powerful self and becomes a very assertive and reliable character. And then there's the anthropomorphization of repressed fears or desires. On our previous slide, we had a bullet point that talked about the humanity switch. That is literally the choice to no longer feel pain entirely. There is the fear of death, choosing immortality over death. And then the love triangle, of course. It represents desire, a classic map of desire. Do you choose safe love or do you choose dangerous love? Now, when it comes to gender, the show is a little bit contradictory. Like I said before, Caroline's arc is actually really nice. I love the way her character transforms into a very confident and reliable friend and leader. While Elena is the moral center of the show, but has literally almost like no agency throughout the whole thing. Stefan and Damon are just there, brooding, dangerous, and romanticized. And often they're the ones making Elena's decisions for her, lying to her, manipulating her, compelling her. There's just no end to it. Now, when it comes to the traditional versus invented concepts within the show, the Vampire Diaries actually sticks to the traditional aspect of vampires fairly closely. Surprisingly enough, right? Where we start to differentiate does come in with obviously the Cure, the Daylight Ring, which completely scraps the idea of vampires like burning up in the sunlight. And even the romanticization of the relationship between vampires and humans, they're lovers rather than hunter and prey. And then on gender, well, on a surface level, The Vampire Diaries is a fairly progressive show, actually offering fairly important and powerful roles to women, vampires, witches, and hunters. But there is a double standard underneath. Male vampire power is brooding and misunderstood and romantic, while female vampire power is violent and comes with struggle and so much emotion and turmoil and um, often comes with a lot of consequence. I mean, the double standard here, Catherine Pierce, she does a lot of the same things Damon does throughout the show. She is cruel, she drinks, she feasts upon humans, she manipulates, she compels. But Damon is misunderstood, and Damon is loved and excused for it, while Catherine is constantly facing consequences. Takeaways. Despite the criticisms that I just gave to the show, it is actually a fairly entertaining show. One of my favorite guilty pleasure shows. I still go back and rewatch it from time to time, and I do actually really enjoy what they did with the vampires and all the different concepts that they introduced. How they stuck to the original traditional idea of a vampire versus the modern perspective that they took on it with how they represent modern fears like anxiety, not belonging, and wanting to be loved, which aren't peasant fears. No, that's not the fear of dying. That's not the fear of poverty and illness. That's the fear of an average day-to-day human. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to my presentation today.